The weather impacting funeral services for former Congressman John Dingell. The dozens of members of Congress whose planes had to be turned around because of conditions gathering just moments ago on the steps of the Capitol in Washington to pay their respects.
One lawmaker tweeting that they actually held an in-flight service for Dingell at 30,000 feet, led by Representatives John Lewis, Nancy Pelosi, and Fred Upton. And here at home, it was a beautiful farewell.
Mourners packed the Church of the Divine Child for a funeral mass for John Dingell. It was a day of tears and laughter, honor and celebration. One that brought out leaders from all over Michigan and the nation to pay respect to a man who lived a life dedicated to service.
We have Team 7 coverage. Heather Catallo is live in Washington, D.C. But we begin with 7 Action News reporter Kim Russell in Dearborn to show you how Michigan said goodbye to a legend.
We heard from community leaders, former Vice President Joe Biden, and people who knew John Dingell well. But perhaps the most touching tributes came from people who didn't know him well, but say his legislation impacted their lives greatly. Firefighters who shared stories of how John Dingell visited their firehouse and thanked them for their service honored the longest-serving congressman. His hearse drove under their American flag as it arrived at the Church of the Divine Child in Dearborn. His wife, Congresswoman Debbie Dingell, and family members escorted the casket into the church with former Vice President Joe Biden, who delivered the eulogy.
Everything he worked on was rooted in that knowledge, in the belief that every single solitary person wanted and deserved to be treated with dignity.
That dignity inspired many to come to pay respect. One man recalled how the congressman spoke out for Muslim Americans after September 11th.
And he was shielding us, our community, during the time of hardship.
Others spoke about how his legislation that made Medicaid and Medicare possible saved lives, how the environment is better thanks to him, and how he made them feel they had a voice as Americans.
I'm on Medicaid, and that's the only thing that's getting me through, and that's what's keeping me alive.
I care so much about the environment, and he was instrumental in cleaning up the Rouge River.
John devoted his whole life for an immigrant like me and people in general.
When they say for the good of all, that describes John Dingell.
He cared about people that he never met. He cared about people who would never cross his path, but he knew needed help.
Family members tell me this outpouring of support is helping them grieve this most monumental loss. In Dearborn, Kim Russell, 7 Action News.
And the tribute for the longest-serving congressman is now turning to our nation's capital. The casket carrying John Dingell drove by the U.S. Capitol just moments ago.
Our Heather Catallo is live in Washington tonight with how lawmakers are paying their respects. Heather.
Alan and Glenda, the dean has come home. Just a few moments ago, the motorcade carrying his casket was here at the steps, and it was such a touching moment as members of Congress stood by, hands on heart, to say farewell to John Dingell. And joining me now, Congressman Fred Upton. You were on the plane today. You couldn't quite make it all the way to Detroit for the service. Tell us about the service that you held in the air.
Well, we all thought we'd be there. I was on the speaker's plane. We had 2 plane loads of members, probably almost 100 members altogether. And when we learned that the freezing rain was going to prevent us from being there after we had circled for about an hour, John Lewis, who is minister on his own right, and of course marched with Dr. King, we all came up to the front of the cabin, all held hands. He and I spoke, along with the speaker, just praising a good man who finished strong, and a guy that many of us knew for a lot of decades, who really made a mark on American history in a big way.
What do you think his legacy will be?
He was so good. He commanded a committee, bipartisan in so many different ways. He cared about the environment. He cared about health care. Cared a lot. He and I wrote the law on the auto rescue plan. Cared about the Great Lakes. He cared about our people. And he cared about his dad. In fact, when he was sworn in, he was the youngest member of the 84th Congress. That was 1955 when he was sworn in. His dad died in office. Debbie, of course, now has his seat. He'd been married almost 40 years. Dingell has represented Southeast Michigan for 86 years. That's something else. That's just an incredible thing. But he had friends on both sides of the aisle he really cared about. Think about back to 1950. He was there as a page. He was there for the speech, Day of Infamy speech. I mean, he served the greatest generation, World War II. He was going to go to Japan had the bomb not been dropped. I finished his book just a couple weeks ago. Just an incredible life story and so genuine. Really so genuine.
So genuine, and I know you were so close, so my sincere condolences. I know you're going to be at the funeral Thursday. There's going to be services held here in Washington, D.C. at Holy Trinity Catholic Church at 10:30. Of course, we're going to be here every step of the way, covering the services, covering all of the tributes to the legend, the Dean, John Dingell. Reporting live at the Capitol, I'm Heather Catallo, 7 Action News.
From the youngest to the longest, impacting our nation's history. Heather, thank you.
And Heather and Carolyn Clifford will be in Washington covering the Congressman's services there. You can look for their live reports tomorrow and Thursday right here on 7 Action News.
And on Thursday, we will be live streaming Congressman Dingell's memorial service on WXYZ.com. Our coverage for that will be starting at 10:30 a.m.